Not every tradition disappears because it was banned. Most of them disappear because one day we simply stop doing them. No announcement, no farewell party. No one really notices. Like a friend who vanishes from the group chat and years later you suddenly think, wait. Where did they go? Do you remember the last time you picked up the phone without knowing who was calling? Remember when kids disappeared for the entire afternoon and no one opened a tracking app? No panic, no notifications. Remember when the whole family watched the same TV on the same screen and had to tune in at the exact right time? Today, everything is faster, more convenient, smarter, but also quieter, more isolated, and easier to forget. In this video are 31 American traditions so familiar that many people forgot they ever existed. Stick around till the end. At least one of them used to be your childhood. Story 1. Answering the phone without knowing who was calling. Back then, when the phone rang, the whole house went quiet. No name, no photo, no hints, just the ringing sound and a very real moment of suspense. You stared at the phone, took a deep breath, then picked it up with the politest voice you had ever used in your life. It could be your best friend. It could be your crush. Or it could be your aunt calling the wrong number. For the 4th time that week, you didn't dare hang up. What if it was someone important? What if it was big news? Picking up felt like opening a gift box. Inside could be happiness or a mild emotional jump scare. Now it's different. Your phone only rings when you already know exactly who's calling, why they're calling, and whether they're worth answering. If there's no name on the screen, there's a 99% chance it's spam, a scam, or someone about to ask you about car insurance. Back then, picking up the phone was an adventure. Today, picking up the phone is a strategic decision. Story 2. Kids disappearing all afternoon and no one panicked. There was a time when kids left the house after lunch and just disappeared. No GPS, no texts. No one knew exactly where they were. All they had was a bike, a couple of scraped knees, and a very vague promise, I'll be home before dark. They rode everywhere. A friend's house, the park, that alley with the no entry sign that everyone entered anyway. If they got lost, the solution was simple. Ask the nearest stranger. Or keep biking until something started to look familiar. And somehow no one panicked. No emergency alerts. No helicopters, no parent group chats exploding. Compared to today, it sounds like science fiction. Modern parents have apps tracking every meter, sending notifications if their kid stands still for more than 3 minutes. Kids don't disappear anymore. They're just constantly located. Back then, kids had freedom. Today, they have strong Wi-Fi. Story 3. Family Sunday Dinner. Back then, Sunday dinner wasn't just about eating. It was a ritual. The whole family sat around the table passing mashed potatoes and pretending to listen closely to the same story that had been told, at least 17 times before. Grandpa told his version of the past. Dad retold the exact same story, just longer. And someone always blurted out, I've heard this part already. No one was allowed to leave early. No one was allowed to bring a phone to the table. And if you accidentally spilled a drink, don't worry, that moment would be retold at every family gathering for the next 10 years. Compared to today, it feels like a completely different world. Modern Sunday dinner is often a reheated burrito eaten quickly by the sink. One person on Netflix, one person scrolling TikTok, and one person texting, the person sitting right across from them. Back then, Sunday dinner was about family connection. Today, it's just when everyone charges their phone. Story 4. Blockbuster and the ritual of choosing a movie. There was a time when watching a movie started before the movie actually started. You walked into Blockbuster like entering a sacred library, slowly strolling down the aisles, pulling tapes off the shelf, reading the back covers, and pretending you had very refined taste in cinema. The whole group stood there for at least 20 minutes. One person wanted action, one wanted comedy, and there was always one person insisting this one's really good, despite having never seen it. The argument dragged on so long you started getting hungry again. Eventually, someone grabbed a random tape, not because it was the best choice, but because someone sighed and said, fine, this one's okay, now it's different. You open Netflix, scroll for 30-40 minutes, read descriptions, watch trailers, add things to your list, then turn off the TV and go to sleep. Back then, choosing a movie was a ritual. Today, it's a test of endurance. Story 5. Watching TV together on one screen. Back then, watching TV was a family event. Everyone planned around the broadcast time because missing even a few minutes meant missing something important. No rewinding, no watching later, and definitely no, I'll watch it later. You ran from the bathroom to the living room, hair still wet, just to catch the opening theme. Anyone who arrived late had to sit quietly, absolutely not allowed to ask. So what happened so far? Ask that, and the whole room would turn and stare at you with the kind of look that made you instantly regret speaking. The entire family sat in front of one screen, laughing together, sitting in silence together, and getting equally annoyed when the commercials went on too long. Now it's different. Everyone has their own screen, their own account, and an algorithm that understands them better than most relatives. One person is on episode 5. Another is still watching the trailer. No one is watching together, but everyone says they've already seen it. Back then, TV brought people closer. Today, it's very smart, but only smart enough for one person at a time. Story 6. Outdoor games instead of screens. Back then, outdoor games came with a certain level of danger. You climbed trees without a helmet, jumped off steps without warming up, and treated scrapes and bruises like badges of honor. The rules were simple. If you fell but could still stand up, the game continued. If you were bleeding but not crying, you were fine. And if you came home with torn pants, you just said, "I slipped." We played until we were completely exhausted, arms and legs covered in dust, but smiling nonstop. No screens, no virtual points, just real moments. Now it's different. Games are safer, cleaner, and come with detailed instructions. Kids sit still holding an iPad playing online games with someone somewhere far away. No scrapes, no dirt, and no one needs a bandage. Back then, games taught us how to get back up. Today, they just teach us how to unlock a screen. Story 7. Going to the mall. Just to walk around and people watch. Back then, going to the mall wasn't about shopping. Going to the mall was about being seen. The mall was real-life social media where you wore your best outfit just to walk around and watch other people do the exact same thing. You walked one full lap around the food court, didn't eat anything. Past clothing stores, tried on nothing. Yet somehow the trip still felt like a success because you ran into friends, spotted familiar faces, and accidentally overheard a few conversations that were definitely not meant for you. The mall was where people went to date, hang out, and accidentally bump into each other. Buying nothing was totally fine. What mattered was showing up. Now it's different. Malls are emptier, stores are closed, hallways are quiet. People shop online in pajamas with no audience at all. Back then, the mall was where social life happened. Today, it's just the background for nostalgic photos captioned, "Man, this used to be fun." Story 8. Waiting for photos and opening the envelope. Back then, after taking photos, there was no such thing as seeing them right away. You had to wait. A few days, sometimes an entire week. And during that time, your imagination worked overtime. This one must look great. That one might be a little blurry, but probably still usable. When the day finally came, you held the photo envelope like it was exam results. You opened it one photo at a time. Some were blurry. Some had someone blinking. Some had a finger covering half the lens. But somehow every single one felt precious. The photos weren't perfect, but they were real. No filters, no brightness adjustments, no deleting because my face looks weird. Now it's different. We take 30 photos of the same moment, look at them instantly, delete 29 within 10 seconds, and completely forget where the remaining one even is. Back then, photos helped you remember the moment. Today, the moment disappears faster than your phone's storage. Story 9. Paper tickets and ticket stubs. Back then, paper tickets weren't just for getting in. They were proof that you were actually there. You tore the stub, slid it into your wallet, stuffed it into a jacket pocket, or tossed it into a random drawer to keep for later. And of course, later meant years later when you were cleaning the house and found it like an ancient artifact. All it took was one look at that slightly crumpled stub, the ink already fading, and the memories came rushing back. That concert, that game, who you went with, and the late realization, wait, why was I spending money like that back then? A ticket stub didn't need batteries, no passwords, no software updates. It just sat there quietly waiting for you to remember. Now it's different. Tickets are QR codes on your phone. Scan it, and it's done. The memory gets replaced by a confirmation email you never open again. Back then, ticket stubs were souvenirs. Today, memories last until you switch to a new phone. Story 10. Playing outside until the streetlights came on. Back then, there was no official curfew, no announcements, no countdown. The only sign it was time to go home was the moment the streetlights turned on. When the light at the end of the alley flickered to life, everyone instantly understood the game was over. No reminders needed, no arguments. The kids who lived farther away started pedaling faster. The ones who lived nearby pretended not to see the light, trying to squeeze in one last very important play. We played until it was fully dark, arms and legs covered in dust clothes, noticeably darker than when we left the house. No one asked what time it was. Time was measured by how tired you were and by voices calling from far away. Now it's different. Kids have clear curfews. Phones buzz with reminders. Notifications get sent straight to parents. Back then, streetlights decided when the game ended. Today, phones decide, and they never let you play one more round. Story 11. Writing letters by hand and waiting for a reply. Back then, writing a handwritten letter was serious business almost. Stressful. You had to choose proper paper, pick a pen with smooth ink, then sit there thinking for a long time before writing the very first word. Every word carried weight. If you made a mistake, you crossed it out. If the crossing out looked bad, you tore the page. And tearing the page meant starting over like you had just ruined a piece of art. Once it was finished, you put the letter in an envelope stuck on a stamp and began the hardest part, waiting. Waiting a few days, sometimes a few weeks. Every time you heard the mail truck pass by, your heart beat a little faster, even though you knew there was a 90% chance it was just bills. Now it's different. Messages are sent in 1 second, seen in half a second. Then complete silence. Just the word seen sitting there, colder than any rejection letter ever was. Back then, waiting for a reply was exciting. Today, waiting for a reply means re-examining your entire life. Story 12. Showing up at a friend's house without texting first. Back then, stopping by a friend's house was completely normal. You walked past, saw the lights were on, so you knocked. No warning, no permission. Just standing there, a little nervous, but hopeful. If the door opened, it was a pleasant surprise. Sometimes you were invited in for a drink. Sometimes you just sat on the porch and talked for 15 minutes. And sometimes your friend's mom said, "They're in the shower," and everyone laughed it off like nothing weird had happened. Now it's completely different. Showing up without texting first is almost dangerous. If you ring the doorbell unexpectedly, everyone inside goes silent, turns off the TV, and looks at each other like they're in a spy movie. Not because they don't like you, but because they're not mentally prepared. Back then, knocking on the door was a greeting. Today, it's a test of social trust. Story 13. Sunday comics and reading together as a family. Back then, Sunday comics were a weekend event. The rustling sound of newspaper pages felt like an opening theme. The whole family split the sections. One kid grabbed Garfield, another fought over Calvin and Hobbes, and someone was always trying to sneak a peek at someone else's page. You read slowly, very slowly. Not because it was hard to understand, but because you wanted the fun to last. Laughing alone wasn't enough. You waited for the person next to you to finish reading so you could laugh together on the same beat. Some characters felt so familiar they were basically family, showing up every Sunday, no announcement needed. Now it's different. Content is faster, shorter. 7 seconds is enough to laugh, then you scroll on. No newspaper, no ink, no one sitting next to you to ask, "Wait, what part was funny?" Back then, Sunday comics were a shared moment. Today, the laughter is still there. It's just everyone laughing at their own screen. Story 14. Arcades and the unwritten rules between players. Back then, arcades had their own rules. No signs, no explanations. But everyone knew them. You wanted to claim next turn, you placed a coin on the machine. That was it. That coin had more legal authority than a verbal contract. You played in tense silence. Behind you stood a line of people watching, arms crossed, breathing quietly but full of pressure. Every time you lost a life, someone behind you would slightly shake their head like you had just disappointed them on a personal level. There was no trash talk through headsets, no mute button. just very real judgmental stares and the sound of buttons clicking like a countdown clock. Now it's different. Online games let you play with someone somewhere far away, no one standing behind you staring holes into your back. You lose, no big deal. You quit the game, no one even knows. Back then, arcades taught you to play well, because someone was watching. Story 15. Movie tickets you kept as souvenirs. Back then, movie tickets weren't just for getting into the theater. They were physical pieces of memory. You slipped the ticket into your wallet, tucked it into a jacket pocket, or dropped it into a drawer, with the very optimistic thought, I'll keep this as a souvenir. And then you forgot about it, until one day, while cleaning your room. Suddenly, everything came back. That movie, the late showing, the slightly off-center seats, who was sitting next to you, even the mild annoyance of overpriced popcorn that you still bought anyway. Every ticket came with a story. No app required, no login needed. You just looked at it and remembered. Now it's different. Your movie history lives somewhere inside a faceless account. You know you've watched it, but you don't remember when, with whom, or why you watched it in the first place. Back then, movie tickets were memories. Today, movies move so fast, you barely remember them before the algorithm recommends the next one. Story 16. Serious RSVPs and keeping your word. Back then, RSVP wasn't just a button you clicked for fun. It was a real promise. You received an invitation, read it carefully, then responded clearly yes or no. If you said you were coming, you showed up. No, let's see how I feel that day. No, I'll confirm later. And definitely no last-minute texts like, sorry, something came up. Hosts relied on RSVPs to cook food, arrange tables, set up chairs, and figure out how many portions were needed. When someone didn't show up after saying yes, the consequence wasn't just one empty seat. It was extra food, extra chairs, and an awkward silent moment when someone asked, wait, where are they? Now it's different. Modern RSVPs feel like weather forecasts. They might be accurate, they might not. And they can change at the last minute with no explanation at all. You click interested, you say maybe, then the day comes, and you disappear. Back then, RSVP meant commitment. Today, it's just a very fragile intention. Story 17. Milk delivery and quiet mornings. Back then, mornings started gently. No blaring alarm clocks, no notifications saying your order is arriving. Just a bottle of milk placed neatly at the door, so quiet you almost wondered if it appeared by magic. Milk delivery was convenience that didn't interrupt anyone. The milk arrived while the sky was still pale, cold glass bottles waiting outside. No knocking, no phone calls, no texts asking if you were home. You opened the door, saw the milk, and somehow the whole day slowed down by one beat. Everything had order, a schedule, a feeling that life knew how to wait. Now it's different. You order milk at 11 p.m., it arrives at 2 a.m., along with eggs, snacks, energy drinks, and an inner monologue like, what am I doing with my life back then? Milk delivery blended into a quiet morning. Today, deliveries can show up any time, like modern life is afraid you might get even one moment of rest. Story 18. Hailing a taxi by hand and waiting. Back then, getting a taxi was a test of faith. You stood by the roadside, raised your hand, and hoped the universe understood your intentions. No maps, no apps, no notifications saying your car will arrive in 3 minutes. You didn't know when a taxi would appear. It could be immediate. It could be 15 minutes later. Or it might never come at all. While waiting, your mind wandered. Am I standing in the right spot? Should I wave more aggressively? Or do I just not look like someone who's going to pay? Then suddenly a taxi appeared. You got in with a small sense of victory, like you had just passed a personal challenge. Now it's different. You open an app and track the car moving meter by meter. You know the driver's name, the license plate, and their star rating. If the car is 2 minutes late, you're already annoyed. Back then, hailing a taxi taught you patience. Today, apps teach you precisely timed impatience. Story 19. The lemonade stand in front of the house. Back then, selling lemonade was your first startup. You set up a small table in front of the house, mixed lemonade using a very scientific formula, water, sugar, and confidence. Pricing was simple, no taxes, no receipts, and profit was counted by the number of coins clinking inside a plastic jar. Your customers were the neighbors. They didn't buy because they were thirsty, but because you stood there looking serious, like a CEO who was 4 feet tall. One sip of lemonade, one smile. That was enough. Now it's different. Selling lemonade sounds like a legal project. You need permits, health regulations, and possibly a long email explaining why your folding table doesn't meet standards. A kid who can't even do fractions yet has to learn the concept of compliance. Back then, selling lemonade taught you how business works. Today, it teaches you that business is fun, until the rules show up. Story 20. Fairs and goldfish in plastic bags. Back then, fairs were where bad decisions were made very quickly. You tossed a ping pong ball. It landed in a tiny cup. And just like that, you won. A goldfish in a thin plastic bag. The joy was completely real. You carried the swinging bag, watched the fish swim in circles, and truly believed you had just won at life. No one thought about tomorrow. No one asked what the fish ate. What mattered was that you beat a game designed for you to lose. Then the fish came home. The whole family looked at it with mild concern. And a few days later, the fish quietly disappeared, leaving behind an oddly hard-to-explain absence. Now it's different. We understand more about animals' responsibility and why goldfish should not be prizes. Back then, the goldfish was a short-lived joy. Today, it's a memory that's funny and just a little embarrassing. Story 21. Fast food playgrounds and a germ-filled childhood. Back then, fast food playgrounds looked like open biological labs, plastic slides, colorful ball pits, and a very specific smell that to this day no one has been able to explain. Kids climbed like tomorrow didn't exist. No helmets, no close supervision. If you crawled out of the slide with a scratch, congratulations, you played it the right way. And if nothing happened to you, you went back in for another round to make it count. Parents sat far away, sipping coffee, trusting that everything would be fine. Worst case scenario, you washed your hands a little more thoroughly than usual. Very thoroughly. Now it's different. Playgrounds have to be clean, perfectly safe, regulated, restricted, with more warning signs than an actual laboratory. Back then, playgrounds made kids stronger in a very natural way. Today, they're safer, but also so clean there's barely anything left to remember. Story 22. Drive-in theaters and awkward dates. Back then, drive-in theaters were the most romantic places no one dared to call romantic. You drove in, parked in the right row, hung that metal speaker on the car window, and pretended you were there just to watch a movie. The privacy fit neatly inside the car, dark enough, quiet enough, and awkward enough. The movie played on a giant screen, but honestly, no one remembered the plot. What mattered was the distance between two people on the front seat. At first, very proper, then slowly, a little less proper. Every movement was careful and slow because you didn't want anyone to notice, even though no one actually cared. Now it's different. Watching movies happens on phones, lying on a bed, each person with their own headphones. No shared space, no nervous excitement, and none of that unforgettable awkwardness. Back then, drive-in theaters didn't just show movies, they showed youth itself. Story 23. Treehouses and a dangerous childhood. Back then, treehouses were childhood construction projects built entirely on impulse. No blueprints, no permits. No one asked whether the lead engineer actually knew how to hammer a nail. All you needed were a few planks, a hammer, and an unshakable belief that this should be fine. We built them ourselves. And as expected, we also destroyed them ourselves. Some collapsed after a week. Some collapsed on opening day. But it was fine because every scratch was treated as proof of bravery. Tree houses weren't sturdy, weren't balanced, and were absolutely not safe. But they were fortresses, secret bases, places where you truly believed you were in control of the entire world. From 2 meters off the ground, now it's different. The moment someone mentions a treehouse, people start thinking about liability insurance and neighbors calling to double check. Back then, treehouses taught us how to take risks. Today, they teach adults how to worry ahead. Story 24. The morning paper. Back then, mornings began with coffee and a printed newspaper. You opened it up, paper rustling, the smell of ink mixing with hot coffee, and your brain slowly powered on responsibly. News arrived at a calm pace. Front page first, then sports, then the comics. Like a reward for trying to be an adult. You didn't need to know everything immediately, just enough to talk to other people. And if there was bad news, at least it stayed still on the paper, not jumping off a screen demanding your attention. Now it's different. The news shows up before you even open your eyes. Your phone vibrates, notifications flash. Every minute there's breaking news, and none of it waits for you to finish your coffee. Back then, reading the paper was a morning ritual. Today, the news is a constant downpour, and you're just trying to stand still long enough to not get swept away. Story 25. Board game night and real arguments. Back then, board game night wasn't just about playing games. It was a relationship stress test. Put Monopoly on the table, and someone was going to cry. Pull out Uno, and someone was going to cheat. And if it was Scrabble, prepare yourself for arguments about, is that even a real word? The fun was real. But the conflict was just as real. You rolled the dice with shaky hands. You stared at the person across from you with pure suspicion. And when someone secretly hid a card under the table, the entire room went silent in a very personal way. There was no mute button, no report feature. You had to face the person who betrayed you in the previous round, and then still sit at the same dinner table together. Now it's different. Playing online is convenient, clean, and very emotionless. You lose and you quit. No one gets mad. No one remembers. Back then, board games created memories. Today, online games just create match histories no one ever looks at. Story 26. Paper invitations for parties and weddings. Back then, receiving a paper invitation felt very meaningful. Thick envelope, nice printing. Sometimes it even smelled like fresh paper. The moment you held it, you knew, okay, this one matters. You opened it slowly, read every line, and automatically became more serious. There was a date, a time, a location, and the feeling that someone had actually thought about you, not just clicked the wrong button. Paper invitations didn't let you hide. You had to respond. You had to decide. And if you said you were going, then you really should show up properly. Now it's different. Invitations arrive as tiny notifications on a screen. You tap going, then forget about it. Or worse, you tap interested, like you're saving an item to maybe buy later. Back then, paper invitations made you feel important. Today, digital invites make you feel like just another name on an endless list. Story 27. Watching TV on a broadcast schedule. Back then, watching TV was a serious commitment. If a show aired at a certain time, you were there at that time. No rewinding, no skipping, no concept of I'll binge it this weekend. If you were 5 minutes late, it felt like you had just missed a national secret. You sat down and tried to piece the story together from whispered updates. Wait, where are we at? That question was usually answered with a look strong enough to keep you quiet for the rest of the episode. Commercials came on and no one liked them, but no one left either. That was the moment to grab snacks, use the bathroom as fast as possible, and sprint back to your seat before the show returned. Now it's different. You can watch any time. Watch half an episode and stop. Watch 3 minutes and switch, and eventually watch nothing at all. Back then, broadcast schedules decided your evenings. Today, too many choices leave you choosing nothing. Story 28. Waiting instead of getting it instantly. Back then, waiting was a life skill. You ordered something and then waited. A few days, sometimes a few weeks. And while you waited, you learned how to imagine how great it would be when it finally arrived. Waiting wasn't fun, but it had a ritual. You checked the calendar. You guessed the delivery date. You told yourself maybe it'll come tomorrow. And when it actually arrived, it felt like a late birthday still worth celebrating. Now it's different. Everything arrives instantly. Watch a movie instantly. Order something and get it within the hour. Hungry food shows up before you even have time to regret your decision. If you wait more than 5 minutes, you start getting annoyed. Patience used to be part of life. Now it feels like a system error. Back then, waiting made joy grow bigger. Today, instant gratification makes everything pass by so fast you barely have time to enjoy it. Story 29. Small traditions that never had a name. Back then, there were countless habits that existed without needing a name. No hashtags, no categories. No one officially declared, from now on, this is a tradition. They simply happened. Very small things. The way you greeted neighbors every morning. The way you sat in silence next to someone without feeling awkward. The way you did familiar things so naturally no explanation was ever needed. They existed effortlessly like the breathing of everyday life. No one documented them. No one took photos as proof. And no one thought they would someday need to remember them. Now it's different. Everything gets named, saved, tagged. If there's no photo, no post, it almost feels like it never happened. Back then, small habits didn't need to be remembered because they happened every day. Today, we document everything because we're afraid that if we don't, we'll forget how natural living once felt. Story 30. Traditions that disappeared without a goodbye. Back then, some things left very politely. There was notice, there were goodbyes, there was time to prepare yourself. But many traditions weren't like that. They didn't have farewell parties. They didn't send emails. They didn't post a status saying goodbye. They simply stopped showing up. One day you realize you haven't done that thing in a very long time, and you can't even remember when the last time was, like an old friend disappearing from a group chat. No one kicked them out. They just stopped texting. And one day their name sinks so far down the list you forget you used to talk every day. Looking back now, you're not really sad, just a little surprised, and a little regretful. Those traditions didn't die. They quietly stepped aside to make room for things that are newer, faster, more convenient. And most of us never even realize we forgot to say goodbye. Story 31. The things disappearing right now. We often talk about the things that already disappeared, while missing the ones fading right in front of us, right now. While you're watching this video, the traditions of the present look ordinary. We assume they'll always be there, meeting without scheduling first, answering the phone without it feeling strange, doing something just because it's familiar, no reason needed. Then one day you realize you've stopped doing those things. No big decision, no clear last time, just the next time never happens. A few years later, someone will ask, wait, people actually used to do that? You nod, slightly surprised that you yourself forgot how normal it once felt. Traditions don't disappear in the past. They disappear in the present, quietly, politely. And by the time we notice, they've already become the next memory. Not every tradition needs to be preserved. Honestly, some of them disappearing actually makes sense. But every tradition, no matter how small, tells a very human story about how we once lived together. Now it's your turn. Which tradition from this list do you miss the most? Is there one you lived with, one that felt so normal you never even noticed it? Share your memories in the comments. Reading other people's stories is surprisingly comforting. Sometimes you'll see yourself in them. If you enjoy stories that are both nostalgic and deeply human, consider subscribing to the channel, because there are still so many things we haven't quite forgotten yet. And maybe one day the things we're doing right now will become something someone else says I don't even remember that ever existed.